Good morning, everybody. We'll just give it a few more minutes here for folks to trickle in.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
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 Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Jonathan Crooms, current chair of the Performance Management Subcommittee, and I am going to go ahead and call us to order to start the meeting for our March Performance Management meeting. We do have some guests with us today. I see we have Ricky Gardner from Housing for New Hope, and we also have Tasha Melvin from Families Moving Forward. So we appreciate you all being here, as well as welcome, as always, to our members and to Nicole as well. So we've got a full agenda today. I think we're going to end up with a lot of great discussions, so I'm excited for that. The first thing we'll do is see if anybody wishes to make any public comments. Okay, no public comments. We'll move right to the next item, which would be the approval of the February 2024 minutes. Shantae, as always, does a wonderful job preparing those for us. Do we have any corrections that need to be made to those minutes? Have we had a chance to look at the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, we have a motion by Eliza Matthew to adopt the minutes as prepared. Do we have a second?
Yes, a second, Renee Vaughn.
Okay, we have a second from Renee Vaughn. Any further discussion on the minutes? Okay, let's vote in the chat box. Approve minutes. All right, minutes are approved. The next item that we are going to move into is a discussion on the underspending of COC funded permanent housing grants. This is also, I believe this item is probably what has brought our guests in, as we've invited representatives from some of these projects to talk to us about some of the challenges. So I suspect we'll have a lot of really good discussion today, and I'm looking forward to engaging with you all on this. To start things off, what I would like to do is to have Lloyd, if you would be willing to maybe give us a little bit of an overview of the Excel sheet that I sent out, and kind of talk a little bit about why this is important given that, HUD recaptures funds. And if you would like, I can even share my screen to put up the Excel sheet if that would be easy for you.
Yeah, that'd be fine. Thank you, Colin. Good morning, everyone. Lloyd Schmeidler in the Community Development Office. So, evaluating the spending history of our COC funded projects has been part of our annual evaluation process of our COC funded grants for several years. You may recall it is part of our annual evaluation. That said, as part of this year's evaluation, we wanted to look more closely at the spending history and particularly concern of projects that have in the recent years consistently been underspending their COC award. It's important for people to understand that committee members as well as the organizations that HUD doesn't like to have funds remaining unspent. I will share some information from HUD's website. Did not find a clear presentation specifically addressing the recapturing of funds for the COC grant, but did find some other information about housing counseling agencies that also have had recaptured funds. So there's several reasons that HUD wants to avoid recapturing. One of the kind of umbrella items is that, or kind of large picture, big picture, 10,000 foot picture is that when funds are recaptured, it does not advance the need for the program during congressional appropriations. And as people may know, every year HUD has to go to Congress as part of the federal appropriations and the federal budget negotiations and make the case for funding. So, for example, if HUD is distributing, say, nationwide $2.5 billion for the COC NOFO, and it wants to ask Congress for an increase to $2.6 billion nationwide. If HUD also has to report that, well, HUD recaptured $100 million nationwide of unspent funds, then Congress, our local congressional representative, as well as other Congress people can say, well, why should we increase the budget for homeless programs if we're already not spending all of the money that is being available, that's available? So that's a big picture reason that when funds are recaptured, it makes it more difficult for HUD to seek additional funding. It's important also to understand that when funds are recaptured, those do not come back to Durham. They are put in the overall pot, if you will, for next year or the following year's COC distribution. So they're not added to next year's allocation for Durham. They're essentially lost to the Durham community. It also adds unnecessary administrative burdens to HUD and to grantees. There are processes that HUD uses to recapture funds, and when funds are recaptured because they are unspent in a particular grant year, it does increase overall cost for administrating the program. And it also, where it does significantly impact the Durham COC when funds are recaptured, it is that it reduces the overall effectiveness of the Durham COC insofar as if we had been able to spend those funds and fully expend them, we could have served more people. So for example, just in looking at the most recently completed grant year in across the 5 projects that had unspent funds is reflected on the table. $126,000 were unspent. If we would estimate that one tenant-based housing subsidy might be around $10,000 per year, that would suggest we could have served an additional 12 households and provided them a housing subsidy for that entire year. It also can be helpful, I think, for the committee to understand that our COC grants have various operating years. Some have an operating year or a fiscal year that goes from like April 1st to March 31st. Others might go from July 1st through June 30th. Others might go from October 1st or September 1st. From September 1st to August 31st or October 1st to September 30th. So when we talk about a grant, most recently completed grant year funding, we're not saying precisely when the grant years end. They do vary depending upon the grant agreement that the organization has with HUD. But every year, our annual COC competition, the annual renewal demand, is based on projects that are needing funding for the next grant year. Hope that is making some sense. I can provide more background on that or explain that more clearly. So those are some basic reasons to avoid recapture, and we want to hear that from the agencies as to why they have struggled with fully expending these funds. And then I see in the chat that Jonathan has had to leave the building temporarily because of a fire alarm at the social services building. So we'll continue the discussion by asking if there are any questions about any of the information that I've shared thus far. And if not, then I'll ask our project representatives to share some. Are there any questions that anybody wants to ask about the information that I have shared?
Hi, Lloyd. This is
Hey,
Ricky. What kind of project is Fresh Start? And I ask because they're the only one who has like spent it every year.
Yeah. Fresh Start is also a rapid rehousing project. It specifically, its target population is people experiencing chronic homelessness, but it is a rapid rehousing project, which is why it's in the set with rapid rehousing 1 and 3 at Housing Critical.
Okay, thank you.
Good question. Thanks. Right. So there's two sets of projects on this spreadsheet. Tag Street to Home 1 and 2 are permanent supportive housing projects. And sorry, I didn't indicate that Fresh Start is also rapid rehousing, but it's the 3 of them together. Other questions?
I had one, Lloyd.
Yes.
I was wondering, is there any opportunity across the grant year to reallocate these funds if we find that they are not being spent, or do we just need to wait to the end and then evaluate?
All right. So the organizations themselves have some limited capacities to move funds. I think Ricky or maybe Tracy could confirm. Our understanding is that as long so the budgets for projects have different line items. So for example, a budget might have 70% of the funds for rent assistance, and the remainder, maybe 20% for supportive services and 10% for administrative costs. As long as the adjustment in the overall budget is less than 10%, project could move say 10% of the supportive services budget to rent assistance. If it's going to be more than 10%, there needs to be a budget amendment sent to HUD. HUD does have processes for projects to move monies around within the overall operating year budget. We do not, as a COC, have the ability to go to any of these projects during their particular operating year and say, and help them move things around from one line item to the other. That's their responsibility, is managing the grant. Did I answer the question clearly enough?
Yes.
Okay. Other questions? Okay, not hearing any. I want to invite, since 4 of the projects that have had spending challenges are with Housing for New Hope, and 1 with Alliance, I'm going to invite, I believe, Ricky, perhaps, and Jante to share some about what they've experienced as some of the spending challenges with the 4 projects that are listed as under Housing for New Hope. And then we'll ask Tracy to share some as well about the DASH project. So Ricky or Shante, I'm not sure who is going to take the lead on your share of the presentation.
That would be me, Lloyd. How are you
All
today?
right, Shante, thank you.
I'll be making colorful commentary.
Very good. We need colorful commentary as well.
Am I able to share my screen? We have
Sure.
kind of a PowerPoint.
Let me see. Do you have sharing your screen capability?
Yeah, it just says you cannot start while another participant is sharing.
Yeah, I think until Jonathan returns, unfortunately, I don't know what his situation is. I'm not sure that there's a way to stop sharing his screen so you can share your screen. Melissa, do you have any insights on that?
There you go. You should be able to now.
Awesome.
Thank you. Because we do have 4 projects, we did create a PowerPoint just to kind of make these transitions and make these comments. Let me close this here. If I can't see my notes here. Okay. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So just overall, some of the challenges, and just keep in mind that most of our challenges have been with the Streets to Home 1 and 2 projects. That is our long-term or PSH scattered site supportive housing project. I will say that rapid rehousing has been on the downward trend, but we'll kind of mostly discuss the challenges that we've seen in Streets to Home. And some of the challenges have been just kind of balancing the staff to client ratios. It's difficult to add staff, and just so you all are aware, we've had 1 staff person in the Streets to Home project, 1 case manager managing that entire project for Streets to Home 1 and 2. So that person has had upwards of 30 participants at a time or more.
At its highest, it was 36 at its highest.
And those are, extremely vulnerable people that she's serving independently. And so being just 1 staff person, that client to staff ratio, that's challenging for staff retention, that's challenging for client performance, and just making sure that, staff isn't getting burnt out, clients aren't getting overlooked, we're meeting other performance measures and goals. And this is particularly true in light of increased client needs. So one of the things that we've noticed, and I don't know how others feel in the group, but post-COVID and pre-COVID clients have changed. It seems like post-COVID clients have become more vulnerable, they have higher needs, and more barriers. So with these higher vulnerabilities, it can really make for a stressful and unworkable client caseload. So one of the things that we did do, and you can see when we get to those charts, because we did put some charts in here. One of the things that we did was we tried to reduce some of the client load just to see how that would operate, and it didn't work in our favor. That was kind of a test, trial and error thing that we did, and now we are back to increasing the number of clients we've served because we were able to add a peer support specialist to help support the case manager in this project. Another challenge that we've seen overall is receiving adequate referrals. So lately, it's been a challenge trying to balance the referrals between William Square Andover, Streets to Home, because we're all vying for the same client, and we haven't had a lot of clients on the by name list to fill those spaces.
Shante,
Mhm.
for the record, do you want to like explain what William Square and Andover is in relation to Streets to Home?
Yeah, sure. So William Square and Andover is our properties. We own those properties, and those are um, project-based supportive housing units. And so it's still PSH, it's single occupancy units. Um, and so that's why we're getting the same referrals for Streets to Home and William Square and Andover. And so when you try to mix all of those referrals and balance where each one is going, that has been a challenge compared to what's being offered from the by name list. Another thing that we've noticed is that the average client spend for us hasn't been FMR. And for us, it reads, the grant to us reads that we're paying full rent for the number of clients served at the current FMR. So if the current FMR is 1431, whatever it is today, it is reading that we're serving 20 clients. Let's say Streets to Home 1, just give that example. Streets to Home 1 is serving 20 clients from the start of the grant at full FMR to the end of the grant at full FMR, which conflicts with other performance measures like increasing them and connecting them to income, increasing their income and connecting them to other income or sources, other mainstream benefits, because once a client gets income, then they start paying a portion, which decreases what we spend in rental assistance. Another thing is there's not a lot of turnover in Streets to Home projects, so they're not capturing the higher rental prices. We've had people housed for 3, 4, 5 years, and their rents have not gone up a significant amount, if at all at times. And then the difference for rapid rehousing, there's a high turnover in rapid rehousing, so you can capture those rental increases. But in rapid rehousing, especially over the past 2 years, we've been serving clients that are probably more suited for PSH. So here's our first table. I have to move this.
Shante, can I just add one thing on the
Mhm.
previous slide?
Mhm.
So
Move this out.
just to add some context to Streets to Home not capturing higher rent prices, like we all know, rent has gone up in Durham. Like we have not been immune to that, just like other cities across the country. But I think what is really important to know is that because Streets to Home is permanent supportive housing, it does not have that ebb and flow of clients. Like we're not, discharging a lot of clients throughout the year and intaking new clients. And so that's what's meant by like not able to capitalize on the higher rent prices. Because several of our Streets to Home participants have been in that program for several years. You know, their landlords are happy with them. You know, their rent gets paid. We're checking on those units. We're making so that our Streets of Home participant is a good tenant. And so we've had several instances where a landlord might only increase the yearly rent by $30 or $50. Because like this is a good long-term tenant for them. And so if their rent is low, like if their rent is only $800 and the landlord doesn't increase to $830, okay, cool. But the FMR keeps increasing, exponentially. And so we find ourselves in a situation where we're not able to keep up with what HUD keeps giving us for rental assistance. So I just wanted to add some context around that. Next slide, please.
Yes. So, right, to piggyback off of that, if the landlords are not increasing the rent to FMR or rent reasonable rate closer to FMR, then that means you just have to add more clients and keep adding more clients and keep adding more clients, which goes back to balancing that staff into client ratio. And that's probably one of the biggest challenges that we've seen. And I will just say that, to be fair, rents aren't being capped, like the newer, higher rents aren't being captured, but I will say our housing location team has been really successful in negotiating rental prices to become affordable, because that's the goal, right? We want clients to eventually be able to afford rent independently. So our team has gone and negotiated rental prices to be within FMR, to be within rent reasonableness. But that efficiency does not help with overall spending. And so, for their role, they're tailored to meet the client's needs. And if the client has low income, we want them to be able to pay their rent independently. And so for rapid rehousing programs, that's a really, really good sell, because that's a short-term project, and the goal is to get a client to be able to pay rent independently in a very short amount of time. But for Streets to Home, that has not been as helpful as we like, though that's one of those competing and conflicting things with performance measures. So I think we've gone over the average client spend isn't equaling FMR. And so can you all see the tables clearly at all? Is that
Yes.
okay? It was as big as it could go. So as you can see over the last 3 years, one of the things that you'll see for the operating year for 2020 through 2021, the green area, we served 21 clients and excuse me, we served 21 clients, and we actually didn't leave anything because we moved some money from supportive services. So that was 21 clients for Streets to Home 1. And then for 2021 through 2022, we served 19 clients. And I'm going to tell you the difference in just a second. So for 2021 through 2022, the blue columns, we spent like 30,000 less than the previous year. And our average per household spend was $9,046. We would have needed to spend $11,600 to spend the entire grant. And we would have needed to have served at least 20 clients to do that at the rate which we were spending, which was at the 9,000. And so that's a consistent kind of 20 to 21. But if you have any questions, please ask. For the last year, the most recent year, 2022 through 2023, we spent $7,800 per client average, and we would have needed to serve 25 households to expend the grant at the rate in which we were spending. And this is just for Streets to Home 1. And if you're looking at 25 clients for one project, vulnerable clients, there's one case manager, that's where that balancing that client to staff ratio is a real challenge. And there's not a lot of equity there. Is that making sense to everybody? Before I continue.
Yes.
Yes, it's definitely making sense.
Okay. Now I can't go to the next slide.
You skipped Streets to Home too.
I can't see it. It's like all these bars on top of my screen and they won't move. So for Streets to Home 2, again, this is all monitored by one or facilitated by one person. Yes, Lloyd.
So Shantae, I think the spending, perhaps we could move through that a little more quickly since we haven't shared the specifics of the breakdown of rental assistance, supportive services, and admin, and the number of households served with the overall committee. But the underspending has been shared with the committee in the table that we started with, right?
Oh yeah, I am. I'm almost done with this part.
Okay.
I think, Lloyd, just to piggyback on that, I guess we can move through this quickly, but I think another thing that we wanted to highlight in this presentation was the project performance evaluation. So showing that, there is a correlation between us being able to serve our clients well, trying to meet the needs of the households in our projects, while also trying to meet the needs of the lead agency and what counts as being good performing, and our success in making our clients be in a better place has a negative impact on how much we spend. And there's a huge part of our performance that's based on how much we spend. And so, I know we didn't talk about performance on the previous slide, but I do want to comment that is on each next slide. Continue, Shantae.
Yes. And so for Streets to Home 2, and the reason why we laid it out like this is so that you can see the trends. Like, we've served pretty much the same amount of people, one less person, but you can see on average, and the underspending is in rental assistance. It's not in the supportive services. So you can see if we're only serving one less client, how much less we're spending per year. And you can read that trend. So we've gone from zero, not underspending at all, to spending 37,000, to underspending by 37,000, only serving one less person. So that kind of tells you something else is going on, and it's not just the number of people per staff ratio. The same with rapid rehousing. I will say that rapid rehousing has been on a better trend than for rapid rehousing 3 particularly. I think with rapid rehousing, we could have just served another person. But for that also is just another staffing challenge. For this previous year, we weren't always fully staffed at one time. So there are those things. For rapid rehousing 3, We definitely did a lot better than we did than the previous year, this past year. And part of that is we've also had multiple grants. So we had to expend the CV grant. So you're kind of just layering grant on top of grant on top of grant, but you're not adding staff to the mix. So if we're trying to spend down state CV, city ESG CV, city ESG, state ESG, rapid rehousing 1, rapid rehousing 3, and we still have the same number of staff, that's where those challenges come in for rapid rehousing. And for rapid rehousing 3, I do want to point out the household served. No matter what we've done, we've overspent by more than double, and we still underspent the total
Clarify
rental
that.
payments.
To clarify, we served more
We
households
served
than we
more
need to,
households,
but we still
yeah.
underspent. Thank you.
We've served more households by over like double the households and still underspent. So we served 6, we served 13, and still left 7,900 on the table. And every time I click, it changes the screen now. Wasn't doing that before. But I think here are the solutions. We could obviously add more clients, right? That's an obvious solution. What does that do for staffing? Nothing. Especially if we can't add more staff with that. And so that just creates more burnout, that creates more stress, that creates a potential for lower performance measures in other areas like mainstream benefits, like connections to income. If you keep adding staff and adding staff and adding staff, adding clients and not adding staff. We can increase rental payments for tenants with extremely low rental rates. So for example, in our Streets to Home projects, we have clients with rent as low as $600. So one of the things that we would do is we would go to the landlord. We would, of course, make sure the unit can pass inspection. We would do a rent reasonableness test, and we would check FMR with utilities and suggest a price that the landlord can increase their rent to that meets both FMR and rent reasonableness tests. And that's a win-win for both the landlord and the project, but it doesn't affect the client because the client still only pays 30% of their income towards rent. What we have been doing is funneling zero-income clients to the Streets to Home grants and clients with income to our Williams Grant Andover properties, which is another win-win for the system. And of course, we can pursue a budget amendment to shift rental assistance to supportive services. And one of the things that we could do is analyze average spend per client per year and produce an application reflecting that need. And the reason why that's asterisk is that could be a riskier option, because if every year we underspend and then for some reason we magically can move on an exponential amount of people, then we may kind of set ourselves up to not capture those rent increases. So if we say we're only spending $8,000 per person, we kind of only need the grant to reflect that. If things do increase over time, then that's how HUD kind of issues those grants. They kind of look over time and they evaluate that. So that's the riskier option. That's not the first option, but and then one of the things that we could do is restructure the grant to increase the supportive services or structure it similarly to ESG grants. That could be a push, long push, but it could be a push. And kind of structure with that 60-40 split, 60 towards rental assistance and client services and the other 40% towards supportive services. So we're open to creative ideas. We're open to other ways that we can spend, but I think just overall the challenge has been that staff to client ratio while meeting other performance measures, while maintaining the integrity and the dignity and staff retention overall. I think that's important to know. And I think it's also important to notice that even if we overserve a certain number of households that we're required to serve per grant, we're still underspending. So
Okay.
that kind of reflects that there's something going on with the way the grant is written in the application overall.
Okay. Thank you, Shantae. Appreciate the overview and the presentation. Jonathan has returned.
Yes, I'm so sorry, everyone. Fire alarm went off, and as required by law, have to leave. So
Sure.
I'm sorry I missed the presentation so far. And because I've missed I'm not really sure where we are.
Yeah.
If this is the first presentation or if we've had others. So
That was the first presentation, Jonathan, from Housing for New Hope. We started with them since they had 4 of the 5 projects that have been underspent that we're concerned about. So we can now move to hearing from Tracy at Alliance and the Dash challenges.
Okay, thank you very much, Lloyd, and thank you all, and thanks for your understanding this morning.
Excuse me, y'all. I want to apologize. Can I ask a question real quick? So, hi, my name is Natalie Watson. I'm the interim executive director at the LGBTQ Center of Durham. Lloyd invited me to the meeting, so thank you so much, and thank you, Shantae and Ricky, for that presentation. I'm not trying to be that person, but what are we doing with the information that's being presented today? And I'm only asking this as someone who's second year on the project, and everything that Shantae and Ricky said are some of the issues that we have, and it does not sound like it's an application and grant situation. It sounds like HUD won't change I'm going to be that person. HUD's not changing how they're actually approaching this project. So like, for instance, y'all have the rapid rehousing. We can't funnel anybody into street. We don't have that other option, right? So we have folks who, like, most of our clients can't pay their bills. They don't have a job and they're refusing case management. They're refusing. And that's part of the grant. You're not allowed to, you can't attach, right? It's housing first. You can't attach anything to that. So we totally understand that. So we then have very vulnerable people who are floundering for 2 years because they can, in particular, and then they're back on the streets or they're back on when they are. So I'm not trying to be a butthead. I'm just wondering, the information that's being presented today, how is that being taken back to make changes instead of us being told repeatedly that we got to do something differently when we're now realizing it's not us. And I'm just going to be that person this morning, and I'm going to stop talking.
No, thank you, Natalie, because I'm about to be that person next. So as we prepared for this presentation, there does seem to be like a flaw in how the projects are set up, right? Like HUD assumes we're going to give you the same amount for this many people every year, and we're going to increase it whether you want the extra money or not. Whether you actually need the extra money or not, we're giving it to you. And I think that is a bigger conversation, and I'm sure it's not just siloed to this COC. I'm sure there are other people experiencing the same thing. And it might be something that we do need to elevate higher than this group and, present solutions. I'm done. I'm muting. There we go.
Well, if we're allowed, I know we're in the same boat. I've spoken with several staff members, Lloyd included, from the lead agency. We are in the same situation, probably worse. Our information has not been shared in the spreadsheet that Lloyd has shared, and we are not sure with the staffing challenges, similar to Housing for New Hope. We did not have enough allocated for supportive services. Most of it is going towards rental assistance. But again, the COC has asked all agencies across the board, make sure that they can afford rent once the project ends. So how do we, manage helping them afford rent when we're trying to spend down funds and we don't have the staff to do so or we're getting, similar to Housing for New Hope, we're getting a lot of families and, our housing manager was informed, yeah, you will receive a lot of referrals and you can't support those households because they have zero income. So what are we to do in these situations when these are time limited funding opportunities and all the restrictions that are in place.
Okay, I think Lloyd, I thought you were about to say something, but if not, I have something to say as well.
Well, I'd like to really allow us to hear from Tracy to get an understanding from her as to what the challenges are, and then the next step would be around suggesting some options and hear more about potential strategies for improving the situation, as well as responses from the Performance Management Committee.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll withhold my comments for now, and Tracy, I turn it over to you.
Okay. All right. Good morning. Just to give you sort of like an understanding of, our organization. And also, I wish I could just say ditto and just let's go into the other discussion, because everything that was mentioned is basically applicable to us as well. But for those who are not familiar with Alliance, I'll try to give you an overview of who we are and what we do. We're a managed care organization. Our target population are Medicaid recipients and sometimes those who are uninsured. And most of those individuals are dealing with a range from the youth who are designated IDD, intellectual developmental disabled, to individuals who are dealing with a substance use disorder that could range from an opioid or cocaine or any other substance use disorder, to those who are dealing with mental and behavioral health. And that could be a persistent mental illness, psychosis, where it ranges. And so that's the population we serve. Originally, when we started this grant 12 years ago, can't imagine that much time has passed, but 12 years ago, this project was funded. And originally, we put in our grant application. Excuse me, let me also note, we just don't serve Durham County. When I came on board 7.5 years ago, we were serving 4 counties. Now we serve 7 counties. We just increased that with Harnett County being a part of our catchment area. So we're spread across 7 counties. This is one of several projects that I kind of oversee. And so 12 years ago, we initially said a minimum, we would assist 12 households with tenant-based rental assistance and support services. Those are the only 2 line items in our budget. We provide single straight stream funding from the state as our match, and then staff's time is in-kind services. And so for the most part, we have really tried to practice housing first. Housing first, in theory, is evidence-based, and we know it can work. However, the caveat to that is that we have a lot of individuals who are medically and fragilely vulnerable, who've been homeless for quite some time. And then you compound that with undiagnosis around their mental and behavioral health, and then the unwillingness to do some other things. It just makes it for sometimes to be difficult. But on the positive side, we have housed over 12 individuals. Currently, we have 12 households that we are serving. I would say the majority of our households that we serve under that 17 are single households with 1 person. And then the others are people with a family. Usually it's a single female head of household with maybe 1 or 2 children. And we do have a few households under that subject part as adult children. And so we have to also shift the way we look at that household in terms of their overall income and how much assistance we can provide that individual household. So with case management, contact communication, trying to do annual assessments, and just trying to really build a rapport with most of the individuals that we serve, I think are pluses. Given we are, again, minimum was 12, we serve 17 households. Let me shift into, as a segue, as everyone has kind of mentioned, around some of the cons. Some of the cons are, yes, we practice housing first. However, some members are unwilling to engage in services. There are lots of lease violations and not conforming to or complying with the terms of the lease. While we are thankful for additional funding, the funding doesn't and I think I have a theory, HUD is increasing the funding to match the increase of housing in the areas. We all know across the board, fair market rate rents have increased. However, we don't own or operate any properties. We partner with organizations like CASA, DHIC, and other organizations. They already those properties are already subsidized. They are already properties that are meant to and intended for individuals well below the 60% of the area median income. And so therefore those rent rates are fairly low. We can afford those, but a part of our compliance is that those individuals, if they have income, are paying a portion of their rent to sustain that unit. And so it's not that we're paying the total cost. We are supporting them with utility costs if they need that support, in addition to support services. The majority of our dollars around TBRA, tenant-based rental assistance, are being spent. Where we're not spending as much is support services. Again, practicing housing first, but giving people an option and trying to build that rapport and say, listen, we need to address why you're still using certain opioids. Why you're, still using certain issues, or why you're, not cleaning your house and you're getting a lease violation, and we're being told about this. So those are some of the issues. Again, higher acuity among those who we serve with a need around their substance use, as well as mental behavioral health challenges. Again, we do not own or operate any properties. We really do rely upon our partnership and landlord engagement with those properties that target the low to moderate income households that we serve. The rents, again, have not increased. One of the other things I think Sante kind of hinted to, but really I want to make this an issue as well. We have a lot of our members who were formerly homeless. They built a community out in the streets, their tent community. That was their community. When they are housed, there's a certain level of survivor's remorse, where they will have people come visit them and stay with them, therefore violating their lease and jeopardizing their housing. This is a constant issue we continuously have to battle. And also in terms of just overall, the arch of housing readiness versus housing first. We have a lot of individuals who are referred, who we want to assist. However, they've not been able to stay in the program simply because of their housing readiness. They're not willing to be tethered to a lease agreement, any type of compliance, and it's not even getting engaged in support services. Let's take that off the table. Let's say just maintaining your unit and not having unauthorized visitors or people staying with you, or using illegal substances in your unit. Those are some of the challenges that organizations that are providing permanent supportive housing are dealing with, in addition to spending the money that we continuously receive to offset the cost of the fair market rate. But we're challenged with the fact that these rent rates that we are purposely working with landlords who understand our clientele. A lot of the individual property managers and landlords that are typically out there for the fair market aren't dealing with people who have some of the compounded issues we're dealing with. And so when you're working with organizations who understand, who sympathize, and are having a willingness to work with our population, along with that comes the other issues that I've already mentioned. And so we want to keep them housed, but we're also always advocating for them to stay where they are, simply because we also realize they come to us with a lot of housing barriers, whether there's a prior eviction, an arson, a felony. They're not just, okay, let's put them in housing, put roof over their head. It's not as easy, and it's a lot more complex than that. And then you think about the money that's a part of that. You want to be able to meet compliance and spend down the money, but behind every rent, every support services, every matched dollar is an individual that we're really trying hard, given our staff capacity and also staff ratio to participants, to be able to assist them for the long term that they're in the program, to stabilize them in their housing, and also prepare them with those independent living skills to be able to transition into to more an independent living situation once they leave their permanent supportive housing program. So it's yes, it's about the money, but it's so much more than about the money. It is about those individual dollars that we're spending every month to keep people housed who are sometimes struggling with a lot of different issues, and also resistant to being engaged in support services, resistant to complying with their lease agreement. Because if any of you know who are not in this realm, the lease agreement is typically signed between the participant and the landlord. We're a third-party entity. We're a third-party member that's supporting that person with the subsidy, whether that person meets their part or they have zero income, but we're guaranteeing the money through the use of these grant funds. And so again, it's a lot more complex than the money that we receive every day. It's a lot more complex than saying you need to spend down the money and you need to be higher. We have fluctuated over the years, and I think it's one due to the number of people that have been in the program who've left. Some, unfortunately, didn't just leave on their own. They had natural causes. We had members who died who were dealing with underlying health issues prior to being in our program. And a lot of this we've talked about over the years in the COC. We take people from homelessness where they've built a community out in the streets, out in the tents. We socially isolate them in an apartment, and then we're checking on them, but then they're not wanting to be engaged with a service provider or going to a primary physician to deal with diabetes, untreated high blood pressure, other underlying health issues. And so again, I just want to I can ditto everything that's been presented by Housing for New Hope, but in addition to that, I just want to emphasize it's much more complex than just the money. I think we're all trying to do our best to not only meet CFR and compliance requirements around the funding, but it's also working with a population that has a high acuity of needs, as well as the complexities around keeping them housed, because we recognize they have a lot of housing barriers. So just to up and move them to another apartment is not always easy. We've done that, and it takes a little longer to do that, but we've been willing to do that with partners and being able to advocate to say, yes, you need 2-3 months of rental, security deposit. Okay, we're willing to do that to get this person housed and make sure they are housed. But it's that constant rapport building, constant case management, communication, encouraging, motivational interviewing, trying to engage them to understand that their housing is really critical to their overall health. We do, coming from a managed care organization, we do believe housing is healthcare. When people are housed, they're more likely to be engaged in services. They're more likely to be engaged in other things, but that doesn't always turn out to be the case as a practitioner on the other side. Like I said, in theory, this is great, but practicing this is very difficult at best. So that's my spiel. It doesn't always explain how we are at this point. I'll just give you an update. To date, as of March 14th, I just got a report, and I was talking with our finance team. We have spent $110,362.12. We're 5 months away from our end of our fiscal year, and that's on track for us spending at least 95, if not 99% of our funding for this current year. So that's just to date. In the years prior to that, it has fluctuated based on the number of people that we've had in the program. COVID, of course, we all dealt with that impact to our program, but also other unforeseen things like people dying and, having to replace people in the midst of that, while also taking the necessary precautions during the pandemic. So it doesn't necessarily explain it all, but it kind of gives you an insight and a snippet in terms of how complex this is in terms of just brick and mortar. It is so much more. The human element to this program is critical in how we kind of help them not only sustain their housing, but also help them to live independently. So I'll start from there.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. Questions for Tracy?
Yeah, I just had a comment that I noticed that she said they were supposed to serve 12 and they served 17. And so that goes back to that client staff ratio. Like, we always have to serve more than what our grant tells us we have to serve. And you're asking us to, not you all, but we're being asked to serve a number of people and exceed that number of people with no additional supportive services to attract the staff that can do that, the skill sets, multiple staff, because you're just burning out people, and you can't serve people when you can't serve people, right? You can't serve people if you don't have the staff to do so. You can't serve people with burnt out staff. You can't serve people well and meet other goals. And when you're talking about those higher acuity people, you have 17 people who have co-occurring disorders. You have 17 people you got to connect to income. You have 17 people who have never, or who may have never had their own place. You have 17 people who haven't had a place in 20 plus years. You have 17 people who don't know how to budget. And you're asking a very small number of staff to serve that many people and serve them well. and spend a whole lot of money to do so. And then it's almost like you're being penalized when they have successes, because then they have to start contributing. And then that means you spend less, but you can't add more people to fill that gap because you don't have the capacity to do so. And so that's just how I think she just kind of narrated the challenges that we see kind of from the client services perspective.
Okay, thank you, Shante. Tasha's got her hand raised. Go ahead, Tasha.
I do want to point out, from my vantage point, I'm, not in direct services myself, my team members are, but I've been very impressed, the latter part of last year and this year in the work that the community is doing. We are being led by Jeffrey in getting these referrals to these organizations, these Housing for New Hope, Alliance Health, everyone, FMF, we are all doing our part. I can assure you 100% of all of the families that have moved from our shelter this year has moved because of a housing subsidy, 100%. So we're doing the work. Unfortunately, I'm not sure what more we can do without adjustments on HUD's end, because I've been impressed. I've shared with our board of directors that 100% of our families would not have housing if the funds were not available. And what do we do when those funds end for these families, because it's time limited? But I don't think, as I've said before, I don't think the issue is, the work that the agencies are doing, the staff members are doing. They're doing a phenomenal job. I'm so impressed with the effort. Everyone's working collaboratively and trying to get families in singles houses quickly as possible. So I can say from my point of view that they are doing a phenomenal job. I think we have an opportunity to figure out other ways of addressing these challenges.
Thank you. I'm cognizant of the time is starting to move along very, very quickly. I'm wondering if we could maybe go a little bit direction with this conversation to talking about maybe some ways that that we can address this. I mean, I'm hearing everything I'm hearing, and I agree. I mean, I think HUD does need to adjust things on their end. We're supposed to be low barrier. We're supposed to make sure that everybody has the right to refuse services, even if they really need them. I hear all of that. I think from a practicality standpoint, here we are kind of trying to address yet another thing HUD looks at. How much do we spend down? Is there any other thoughts or conversation for us to be had around some other things that maybe we can do on our end that is in our control? I mean, obviously we can't control necessarily what HUD does, but is there any other thoughts that anyone has about things that we could do differently just within our own COC to try to spend down more?
So I'm just going to speak because I know we're part of the issue because we haven't spent anything down. And so that might be something that y'all can address. We still have issues getting everything connected to be able to draw down for HUD. And our grants manager is not helpful. I'm learning now. This was one of our first federal grants. Grants managers don't help. So for brand new folks into this program, an intensive something on how to manage a federal, not even how to manage a federal grant, because they'll roll your eyes at you if you say, well, we need help with this, right? You're supposed to automatically know how to do it. That would be really helpful for us, was explaining all of that from the beginning, not just sending sheets of paper, but explaining that all from the beginning. And am I allowed to go sit with somebody and say, hey, how do I fill out this form? They keep telling me I got to get it notarized, but my board chair is in Florida. And I'm not trying to make this about me, y'all, but that's part of the issue, right? We haven't spent down money according to HUD because we're not in the system. We've been spending. So that's part of I wanted to at least take our part out of that. That's part of the reason why y'all have all that extra money. But on top of it, I also know that y'all have the landlord initiative, but I want to uplift something that Tracy had mentioned. We've had people who've had their leases violated and they just can't be in the program anymore. And like we're literally losing some apartments because I have gotten into it with this landlord that it turns out she was racist. But because when we were explaining to her what was going on, she didn't want to hear it. And so we have now lost 6 spots that we've had for years because we have a new program. We brought in vulnerable people. They refused all of our services. We paid their rent and they destroyed the apartments. Now we don't have those apartments. Sorry, I did make this about me. I'm gonna let Ricky speak.
No, thank you, Natalie. Go ahead, Ricky.
Yeah, thank you. So I think conversations like this would be helpful on a periodic basis. Like I admit when I got the email, my read of it was very much like, you guys aren't spending the money, so you obviously don't need it. And I know that wasn't the intent, right? But it made me think, okay, well, when was the last time we had a check-in, maybe with performance management or maybe with the lead agency that's like, hey, what are you guys seeing? We've noticed that everything hasn't been spent. And I think there was a conversation pre-COVID because we were meeting at the social services meeting where like it was named in that meeting that HUD continues to increase the rental assistance line item yearly, adjusting for FMR, which is responsible. Like let's clap for a responsible government, but the supportive services line item stays the same. Like whatever you asked for 10 years or 12 years or 15 years ago when you first asked for these funds, that's all we're ever going to give you. And what's up with that? And so it does create this rat race of you have to serve more people trying to spend down the money. If you don't spend down the money, your community could lose it. And you don't want that because homelessness is an issue in your community. But how do we explain and create impactful change that like, hey, thanks for the rental assistance. That's awesome, but we need the supportive services. And I think a deeper conversation that Natalie is bringing up, that the front half of Housing First, awesome. I'm not asking you to change anything. I'm not asking you to be sober. I'm not asking you to be clean. I'm going to journey alongside you where you are right now. I'm going to support you in your housing, and we're going to make a plan for your stability. And the other person could be like, nah, they can decline. Housing First says they don't have to do anything. They don't have to improve on their supportive services plan. They don't have to. They don't have to. So how do we manage that? We lost six spots, Natalie just said, because someone cut up and that landlord is done. And that's what happens when we bring in severely vulnerable people saying, you have a house now. Also, you don't have to do anything we suggest. And we let them live their lives. Like there's a disconnect in that model somewhere.
All right, Lloyd, I think you've got your hand up there. Go ahead.
Well, I think to respond to Ricky's particular question around Housing First, tenants have responsibilities for fulfilling the basic responsibilities of a tenant lease. When they violate the lease, the project and the landlord have the option to terminate the lease and evict the tenant. Projects that are using Housing First approaches then can try to work with the client, say, what did we learn from that? What if we help you find another landlord and another unit, what is going to be different this time, right? And maybe clients, participants, tenants need to re-experience homelessness, but they're given a second chance and sometimes a third chance. So we're not saying, and I don't think HUD is saying, and certainly the COC lead agency is not saying that projects need to allow tenants to do whatever they want to do in their apartment, and there aren't any consequences. You know, there are consequences, and sometimes those consequences can be severe to the point of people becoming homeless again. The reality is that according to our data, Durham has pretty low rates of returns to homelessness. Maybe sometimes even too low, because some of our projects maybe are providing more support than the tenants really deserve or need. So that's a whole discussion. I think specifically for performance management, the COC lead agency is, I think, as in light of this discussion, asking performance management for what it would like to do about the current situation where in the last grant year, over $126,000 was left unspent. If the Performance Management Committee and the COC is okay with that amount of money being unspent and reclaimed by HUD, and that doesn't even include any portion of the LGBTQ centers grant, right? And we don't know yet, Natalie, whether HUD is going to recapture some or all of that grant that you've had trouble getting, getting HUD's grant disbursement system to work with you and get all of that put in place. We're still trying to work with you on that and try to get that resolved so that you can be reimbursed for some of that first year money. But apart from the LGBTQ center, we've got these other 5 grants that have had spending challenges. Is it appropriate for the performance management? Is it appropriate for the Durham COC to say to our COC grantees, we expect a certain percentage of your grant to be spent annually, or we expect that the unspent funds are going to be no more than this amount, and that if projects cannot consistently spend either a certain percentage or have a minimal amount of the grant left unspent, the COC, the Durham COC, it's not the COC lead agency, but it would be the Durham COC says to our projects, unspent funds are liable to be reallocated. Part of what I've heard this morning is that some of our projects are saying, yes, some of them, please reallocate some of the funds because we are really struggling to use all of them. So maybe, I don't know whether some of the projects are saying, yes, please reallocate some of the funds in the 2024 competition because it's likely that we're not going to be able to spend them in the future. I can take a few minutes. I'll share some of this information as follow-up with our grantees, but some of the things I've heard from HUD to avoid recapture or to request a grant extension, to do more to track expenditures, to request technical assistance from HUD. Any COC grantee can go directly to HUD and request technical assistance. You can request a budget modification. We talked about that briefly earlier in today's dialogue. So those are some basic ideas that I'll share further afterwards.
Okay, Tracy, go ahead.
I had a question based on what Lloyd shared in terms of, we all understand HUD uses a formula to determine the allocation for each community. If you're saying that the number of people returning to homelessness has decreased, so the overall number of the population who are considered chronically homeless has decreased, has that been taken in consideration for HUD's formula when they're allocating money to the Durham COC?
HUD's allocation, the HUD COC application is not based on specifically the numbers of homeless people that are found in Durham, and the numbers of chronically homeless people. I would say that when we cannot find chronically homeless people that are eligible for permanent supportive housing projects, there are ordinances and there are regulations that allow the COC to put into permanent supportive housing someone who, strictly speaking, does not meet the chronic homeless definition. We've talked about dedicated plus, you know, as long as people are disabled, and that's part of our coordinated entry process as well as our referral process to find people that are meeting, you know, hopefully, you know, if we've solved chronic homelessness, if there's no more chronically homeless people in Durham, certainly we would want to celebrate that as a community, and HUD would be happy to acknowledge that as well. But I'm not sensing that that's the reality.
Okay. I was just wondering, in terms of the number that you kind of mentioned, that, you know, I'm sure they're looking at the collaborative application, the number of services across the housing continuum, but are they looking at also just the, you know, data around housing inventory, point in time count, those, you know, data points in order to determine, based on their formula, the same level of funding to address? Because I mean, I also understand the Triangle region is an attractive place to live. There are opportunities for people to gain employment. There are opportunities for education and other support services and people to have a good quality of life. But also, if we were to narrow in on that population, 30% below of the area median income of those individuals who are struggling to maintain their housing or gain housing or are actually homeless, I'm just wondering, does all this collectively taken in consideration around the funding for the community as a whole? Because it's not just, if you drill down to the different projects that are funded, it is the community as a whole. Because if we're doing a good job on some aspect of the housing continuum, but we're still receiving this funding, if not additional funding, but we're still serving the same number of people. Like, as the young people like to say, the math isn't mathing. For me at least, and I've been out of grad school for a long time, but the math isn't mathing in some aspect.
I've been involved with the COC annual application for the last 13, 14 years. I don't understand how HUD's formula for how much it awards individual COCs is calculated. It's they talk about final pro rata need and preliminary pro rata need. It's not clear to me what those formulas are. I think they're somewhat based on general census information, but how that information goes into HUD's formula and spits out exactly what the amount is per COC. What I do know is that much of the annual COC application is simply based on what the renewal demand is of the renewed projects.
Okay. I'm going to
20s, I think we need to move on probably.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in here. And so, I mean, Natalie asked, how is this information being used, right? So we are trying to have there are many problems we are all trying to solve, right? Many challenges. Spending down, that's just another one. So we're trying to figure out ways as performance management, since we are charged with, oversight of the whole, COC with monitoring performance, we're trying to figure out how to make this do better. Unfortunately, because I missed the first half of this meeting, well, really the first third, I missed out on a lot of information, and unless other members of the committee feel differently, I don't feel like I can, come up with a suggestion about whether we, should have a benchmark. In fact, I would like to go back and watch the meeting so I can, see what else is out there. So unless other performance management members feel differently, I would like to put this, to put this topic down for now. And then we finish out the meetings with the last two updates on the Housing First evaluation and the spring competition. Does that sound reasonable? Okay. And again, I'm really sorry about this. I really wish I had not missed your presentation, Shante. So if anybody has other things they wish to convey to me as the chair, please feel free to email or call. I'm eager to hear more. So with that said, we do have a little bit of time left here. So Lloyd, I'm going to turn it over to you for two updates. One on the Housing First evaluation, and the other on the upcoming spring COC evaluation.
Thank you, Jonathan. On the Housing First evaluations, they are happening. I know that the site visits to Housing for New Hopes for their evaluation of the permanent supportive housing projects has taken place. Site visits of families moving forward also has taken place, and for those two evaluations, the final evaluation documents are being prepared and should be available to be sent to the organizations. Pretty sure by the end of March, which is our overall deadline. A site visit to Urban Ministries has not yet been scheduled. I think that is to happen also in the next couple of weeks. I believe, and Tracy perhaps can confirm, that a site visit to Alliance to review the DASH project was completed on March 12th, a couple of days ago. And I don't have information on Housing for New Hopes, the evaluation of the Housing for New Hopes rapid rehousing projects, or the LGBTQ Center's rapid rehousing project as well. So, but my understanding is all of the evaluations are still on schedule to be completed by the end of March. Concerning the overall evaluation of our COC funded permanent housing projects, we have been working with the data center at NCCH to develop a custom report that would provide more of the computations directly from the HMIS in a custom report. We're still working with the data center to ensure the accuracy of that custom report, and we're doing some comparison as to how we the Excel spreadsheet doing the calculations would compare with the calculations coming out of the custom report, and we expect to be able to present a final evaluation of the projects at the April meeting of this committee. I would say, based on what we've seen thus far and the spending rates that we talked about this morning, the evaluation document, as people, I think many of the committee members and organizational representatives understand, that there are significant penalties, deductions on the evaluation instrument already for when projects do not spend the full amount of their annual allocation from HUD. There are penalty point deductions for the percentage that is left unspent, and that looks to be that it will impact significantly some of the scores on for those projects. Did that with 5 minutes to spare, Jonathan.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Lloyd. Any questions for Lloyd on either the evaluation or the spring COC evaluation? Okay, Ricky, go ahead.
So, I know it's been in recent years that the COC has decided that, if a grant underspends, that they're going to be penalized for it. Like we made underspending punitive. Like it used to be I think for a few years, we were just doing information only, and now it's like, you didn't spend it, it's a penalty. And I understand that because
Well-
there is like an impact, right? Like if we don't spend the money, HUD could recapture it, right? I'm just wondering, in light of today's conversation, does that in any way change our thinking about that with what, different projects have shared, not just H&H, not just Alliance, not just Families Moving Forward, not just the LGBTQ Center. We're all saying, hey, this is the challenge. Does it in any way have space to say, you know what, we're going to think about why we decided to make underspending punitive? Just a question.
So as chair, I can't answer that right now because I missed, again, missing the first half of the meeting.
I would,
Go ahead, Lloyd.
I can chime in. I think from the COC lead agency's perspective, I would reject the term that it's punitive. And I think even on the performance evaluation tool that this committee has reviewed and approved annually for the semi-annual evaluations of performance, the unspent funds and the points deducted are only one part of the evaluation. It is a significant part, but unspent funds are, only, I think, a relatively small portion of the overall scoring. And the question is, what, and it's really the work of the committee, I think, and the reflections of the committee to decide, if in light of this discussion, the committee wants to remove considerations of unspent funds entirely from the evaluation tool. It certainly is free to do that in the 2025 cycle. We have approved a document, an evaluation tool for 2024. But I think the question for all of us, including the organizations implementing COC funded projects, is to ask, what's a reasonable amount? If it's not reasonable to spend 100% of a COC grant, is it reasonable to expect the project to spend 99%, 95%, 90%, 80%? Is there a certain level that's reasonable? And if so, does the COC want to adopt some kind of benchmark for that? And then to decide, typically, the only, I suppose, action that could be considered punitive would be an actual reallocation of funds against the wishes of the recipient. And the COC and the lead agency have, to this point, never reallocated funds without the agreement of the agency implementing the projects.
Okay, we are at time. I thank everybody for their candid thoughts, for the presentations today. I think at this point, it would be good to go ahead and conclude the meeting. I can tell you as chair, we will be revisiting this topic. I'd like to go ahead and have a motion to adjourn.
So moved,
Jonathan,
Mr. Chair.
can I say something before we adjourn?
Please go ahead. Go ahead.
It will be really quick. I think the information that's been presented today was really good, not only from the lead agency perspective, but also the COC funded projects. And so I think this is a conversation that needs to continue. I echo what Ricky said in terms of, being able to set aside time over the course of the fiscal year to kind of check in with projects and see if individual organization needs assistance or how they can contact HUD or the lead agency to be able to get that. So I think as we move forward to discuss, how we, if there are benchmarks, if anything, I don't think we should, but also how do we check in? How do we set aside time to evaluate where projects are versus where they, where they're projected to be by the end of the fiscal year. So just wanted to say that.
Thank you. And that is one of the things that I did note down, is that I did hear what Ricky said about requesting, a periodic check-in. So that did not go unheard.
Okay. All right, great.
So I did hear a motion from Renee to adjourn, and I need a second.
I'll second.
And a second from Tracy.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you all again. And we'll see you at HSAC.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All
Take
right.
care,
Bye-bye.
everyone.